still frozen from Russia. I think it's going to take me maybe a decade to truly warm up. I love this time of year. I love the spring. And one of the reasons I like it so much is because you see so much new growth. You see new leaves and new blades of grass and new flowers coming out. And it's just kind of bursting forth in life. And what a time for Easter season. A time when we celebrate the resurrection of the Lord, and we see it all around us. See it all around us. I'm going to invite our ushers to come this morning, if you will, and we'll receive our morning tithe and offering. We thank you for your giving to the church. We appreciate that. What a blessing that is to us. And we pray that God will use that for his glory, that God will just take what you give and multiply it over. And you know, one of the things I pray often is that God enables the facility just to be like the children of Israel of old, where it doesn't wear out and doesn't get old. I pray that a lot, that God just protect what he's given to us and that we can get great years out of it. But in the meantime, we thank you for your giving that enables us to reach beyond our walls to help people in this community and around the world. Thank you for your giving. Sean, will you lead us in prayer this morning for the offering? Jesus' name. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. In just a moment, we'll dismiss the children for our first kids service upstairs. And the workers will be back there to help them. Next week will be a special Sunday for us. As Jonathan mentioned a little while ago, please take one of those rescue cards with the little life preserver on it and give it away to somebody. Now, I must say, I have found 2 of them this week. The cards were there, but the lifesavers were missing. I don't know what that means. If you needed it, good. We're thankful for that. Help yourself. But the concept is really to give both away, not just the one. So, but they're in the foyer, and they're in the mustard seed entrance over to my left, your right. And please do grab one of those or a couple of them as you go out. And just be sure to hand them out to your friends or your neighbors. You know, statistics tell us so much that many people would come to church. A really high percentage of people that do not go to church would come to church if they simply had someone invite them. And so do your part. Invite someone. Let's look for a good Sunday next week as we gather together to celebrate Easter. It's going to be a great service, and we're going to have a special children's presentation, and we trust God will anoint the message that will be going forth as we conclude this series I've had. Will be 3 weeks long of a journey towards the cross. So please remember that as we enter this next week. We all have stories from travel that we have done, and how many traveled as kids with your parents on vacation? Piled up in the car and headed some direction on vacation. My dad would do his yearly vacation, and back in that day, we would take really about 3 weeks, if not a month, of his vacation, his full vacation time, and go at one big setting. And we'd take off from Minnesota, central Minnesota, and my mom's parents lived in California, around the Los Angeles area. And so we had planned this vacation, or I should say my mom and dad would plan the vacation, and us 3 kids would just go. We were participants because we had to. And so my dad had this 4-door Rambler. How many remember the Ramblers? Yeah, we had a 4-door Rambler. And it was a good car when it ran. And so Mom would make this big bucket of chicken. Now, you didn't have a lot of wayside places to buy food. You didn't have a lot of McDonald's, and you didn't have a KFC yet really everywhere, anywhere, and there weren't fast food places at all. It hadn't even been developed. So my mom was ahead of her day, and she would go and make this big, big bucket of fried chicken. And we'd carry that in the car with us, and we'd carry one of these big Coleman igloo things of water, ice water, no pop. No pop. We didn't buy pop in that day, and we just drank water with ice in it. And the ice lasted for the first 45 minutes of the journey. We had one of these natural air-conditioned cars. You roll down the 4 windows, and what came in, you got. And so the temperature outside was really the temperature inside, the only difference being it was fresh air. And when you stuck 6 people in a Rambler for long miles, you wanted fresh air. I, being the youngest of the family, really didn't have a choice of where I sat. I sat wherever was allotted to me. And for me, that was in the front seat between Mom and Dad. Now, Dad took about 50% of the front seat just because he wanted it. Mom took another 25%. So I had about 5% or 15% to myself. That was my space. Sometimes I even sat on the armrest. No seat belt. Can you imagine? My parents must have been abusive or somehow. They put me on that armrest, and it's kind of cool because I got to see right outside the window, up front and center. If we ever hit the brakes fast, I'm gone. I'm the hood ornament. And we had journeyed 4,457 miles to Los Angeles, to the home of my wife's mom and dad. At nighttime, we would stop many times at little hotels or what we'd call, what would they be, motels or wayside rests. Sometimes you had little cabins or things similar to that. And rare occasions, we even had a swimming pool. Now, that was pretty cool to have a swimming pool. I didn't even know how to swim, but I just liked the water. It's cool. And for us, we got to wash because we'd been in the car all day. It was really nice to soak in that cool water. And off we'd go to these vacations. Very much remember them. Even today, I remember those journeys. I don't remember a lot of negatives in the journey. I don't remember those things, but I do remember the fact that I went on my journey with my family, and those are incredible memories that I have, those road trips that I had with my family. This week, in part 2 of our series, a 3-week journey to the cross, I want to look at the travel of Jesus, or what I'm calling the value of the road. Strictly based on biblical accounts, if you calculate what we know of Christ from the gospel accounts, he traveled about 3,000 miles by foot. By foot, 3,000 miles. In his lifetime, they estimate that between as a young boy all the way to adulthood, playing as a young boy and whatever else would be in the traveling, he traveled probably 21,000 miles by foot. That's a lot of walking. These journeys during his ministry, these 3,000 miles, would take place in the heat of the Israeli summer. Now it gets hot there. It gets very arid, dusty roads, and a lot of mountains where you're going up and down these numerous rocky mountains in the journeys. And yet he would walk that journey. In the wintertime, he would walk in the freezing cold. And yes, in Israel, it does get quite cold in the winter. Jill and I were there a while back in January, and we came in from Cyprus where we'd been in meetings, and we went across to Israel to spend some time as a family for some vacation, and we just had basically T-shirts. And we woke up in Jerusalem our first morning with 2-3 inches of snow on the ground. Our first souvenirs we bought were hoodies. Jerusalem. It gets cold at times in that country, and yet in the dead of winter, they would be traveling by foot, point A to point B. Most nights, he would probably be sleeping in the open sky, under the open sky, just laying on the ground. He at one time referenced that. His journey took him many places. In fact, if you read through the Gospels, you'll find 40 different references to the traveling mode of Jesus, whether it be by foot or by boat, where he was going from point A to point B. Most of his awake hours would be in journeying, traveling from one place to another, always with his disciples walking alongside of him. Even if you take a look at the first couple chapters of Matthew, you'll see some of this journey explained. Matthew 4, verse 18. As Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon and Peter, and his brother Andrew. Simon Peter and his brother Andrew, walking by the Sea of Galilee. His journey is taking place. He's walking everywhere he goes. Matthew 4, verse 23. It says Jesus went throughout Galilee. Now, Galilee is about 2,000 square miles, if you just want to get a kind of an idea of the size of this dimension. It's not huge by our American standards, and it's not huge by car standards, but by walking by feet, that is a space to cover. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and sickness among the people. Again, we see Jesus, the traveler, Jesus, the walker by feet to his destinations. Matthew chapter 8, verse 1. Once again, we see the reference to a mode of travel or a location. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. Sometimes, even to get away from the multitude, Jesus would wander up into the mountain just to get away from the people. I'm sure he walked a lot of places that we don't even have record of. In fact, the first 9 chapters of Matthew, you'll see 19 references to Jesus walking or movement from one place to another. Moving from a house to a synagogue to the countryside. Is much of the life of Christ. Walking from one place to another. It's a process of the journey to the cross. 3,000-mile journey from when he started his ministry to Good Friday coming up this week when he's on the cross. What can we learn from those road miles? What can we learn from the traveling of Christ? What lessons are discovered in the conversations that Jesus had as he traveled along that great journey? Great conversations happen when you're traveling with somebody. In Russia, when we were there, I spent a lot of time traveling with Russian pastors from point A to point B. Sometimes I was in their cars with them, which really, to me, was one of the greatest steps of faith I ever did in missions. Russian drivers are not known for their patience or their slowness. I was always impressed when I got in a Russian pastor's car. First time I ever got in a Russian pastor's car, before he puts the key in the ignition, everyone sits quietly, and he says, Lord, we commit our time to you. Our lives are in your hands. Have your will, have your way, whatever that be. We trust you with everything. And I thought to myself, wow, how cool is that? Before they ever start the engine, they're committing their travel to God. And I was so impressed until I started seeing them drive. And all of a sudden, I know why they prayed that prayer. The Russian mentality, and I say this in understanding of how they think, they believe in the sovereignty of God, meaning this: God's in control of everything. God's got it all planned out. They strongly believe. Even the secular Russian will believe in the sovereignty of God. I can't change his destiny. What his destiny is for me will happen. Unfortunately, that follows through in too many ways wrong, such as driving. They believe if it's God's time to take me, there's nothing you can do to prevent that. If it's not my time to take me, there's nothing you can do to take me. And they follow that mentality into their steering wheel. And I've ridden with them where they will pass going up a hill without any knowledge of what's coming on the other side. And all of a sudden I find myself praying, God, have mercy. I was riding with a young man. I don't remember his name. It probably doesn't matter. I was not happy with this young fellow at all. In fact, I gave him a little sermon that day. He was driving me from the airport to where I was going to be teaching in about 5 hours. We're in a blizzard. We're a little bit pressed for time. And he's driving like a maniac. Like he wants to be an Indy 500 driver with his Russian Moskvich car. This car is 4 doors of nothingness. But he has that thing cranked where it's just whining through that engine. And he's going as fast as he can on these icy roads in this blizzard. I mean, you have 2 lanes. You have snow piled up on either side like 4 foot high. There's nowhere to go. And he goes to pass a car, probably pushing 60 miles, 65 miles an hour. And as he's passing a car, coming up over the crest, I see a semi. And that semi has the audacity to be in the right lane. His lane, not mine. And we're in his lane. I just begin to say, God have mercy. And as he tries to swerve back, he overcorrects. And we spin. I'm going 60 miles an hour, speeding on the icy roads with a semi bearing down on us. I just didn't know what was going to, I didn't think we were going to survive that one. The car straightened out, slid over as a truck went by. We could have reached out with our pinky and touched it. And after we got done, I said, I need you to pull over for a second. And then we had a conversation. And the rest of the way, I think we drove 15 miles an hour. But most times on those journeys, and I spent thousands of miles, hundreds and hundreds of hours sitting by my Russian counterparts in missions or in ministry. And 95% of the conversation is on ministry, is on how to benefit the body of Christ, how to build the church, how to engage our communities. And the journey during that time became so important to me. I look at Christ's journey, I say, how can we learn from his journey on the road? How can we learn from the journey of Christ? There are a couple of things I see, some components that I think are common in his journey. Here's the first one. In his journey, Jesus showed that people were much more important and valuable than traditions or things. People were more important. Look with me in Matthew chapter 12, verse 1 through 8. Just one of the many, many references we could use. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and he began to pick some of the grains or heads of grain and eat them. Now, just stop there for a second with me. Now, when you take a head of grain and you peel back the shaft of that grain, what you ultimately end up with is like a little piece of rice, of meat, of the grain. It's very small. You're going to have to eat about 11,000 of those to have a real meal. It's not like they're gorging on this grain. It's not like they're taking these and just stuffing them in their mouth. No, it's walking through the field. And as they're walking, they're probably just picking away at it and eating them as they go. It's not something to fill their stomach so much as just it occupies them. Maybe it takes their mind off the fact that we're hungry. The Pharisees, when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look what your disciples are doing. Now just stop a second. Can you imagine the pettiness of these Pharisees? They're literally kind of peeking through the grain fields. I can just imagine them hiding behind the grain stacks, peeking up and seeing what the disciples are going to do next. This is a stalk of grain, by the way. Just want to make sure you understand that. Stalk of grain. What is this? No, it's a microphone. And they're just kind of watching them to see what they'll do wrong. You know, sometimes there are those individuals that simply are watching for people to make mistakes. It happens. Mistakes happen. You know what I want to do? I want to watch for people that are doing great things. And I want to focus on the great things people are doing, saying, hey, good job, rather than looking for the problems, because we all make mistakes. But the Pharisees, they're watching to see what mistakes these disciples are going to do. Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful to do on the Sabbath day. Jesus answered, interesting. Haven't you read what David, your King David, did when he and his companions were hungry? You think what my guys are doing is bad? Look at what David's guys did. They went into the very holy of holies. They went to the house of God. He and his companions ate the consecrated bread that was only for the priest to do. The consecrated bread that was only for the priest. And they ate it. Or haven't you read in the law what the priests on the Sabbath duty in the temple, they desecrate the Sabbath in the temple on that day, and yet are innocent because they're priests. Jesus, I tell you something, greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus was given a very clear point here. He's saying the people are greater than things. People are more important than things. I thank the Lord for traditions, and I thank the Lord for our church building things. This would be a thing. I thank God for it. This past week on Monday, we had fellow ministers from the Tri-Cities come and just visit our building. For the last 18 months, every time our pastor group meets for the assemblies, it's in the Tri-Cities. It hasn't been out here for 18 months, and so we go to every single one. We never miss, and we take our leadership team, and we always attend, and we will continue to do that because I like to be a team player. But finally, at our last meeting, they said, we're going to do a road trip, and we're going to come visit you in Walla Walla just to show support. So they came this last Monday and visited us, and then Bethel, and it is fun showing around the church, around our campus. And God has blessed First Assembly with a beautiful facility. I like this place. It's just beautiful. If you want to see a cool image of the church building facility, go on our webpage at www.first.com, our webpage, and Jessica has worked a lot on that webpage, and it looks cool. Thank you, Jessica. But look at it, and in the front, there's a video you can watch of a drone that takes a picture of our church. And it just kind of backs out and makes the church see the whole background of it. It's really pretty impressive. Don't do it right now. But do it later. But check it out. It's really kind of cool, and look through our webpage. But I think we have a beautiful building. And everything we can do, we try and maintain this building. We try and make this building the best we can make it. Coming up in April, we're going to have a Saturday cleaning day for the church and invite all that can come to come. We're going to be working outside and inside and just do what we can to make this building nice. I thank God for it. We take care of it as much as we can. Last year, we put in 3 new air conditioners and heating units above our heads. And we're thankful for those in the winter, and we're thankful for those in the summer. We did the loft up above, and little things, big things that all make this building functional. And yet, we always have to remember something incredibly important. The value is not in this building to us. The value is not in those units above our head. The value is not in this space in the loft where the children are right now. The value is in us. Thank you. The value is in the people. The value is in the children. The value is in our community. People that need Jesus Christ. That's the value. This is a thing, they're eternal. And the value is always in people. They did a study on the value of the human body just by mineral content. You know how much you're worth? Now, some of you may already know this. You're worth about $15. $15. That's the value of your body. Look to the person to next to you and say to them, you're worth every penny of $15. Now, husbands, if you said that to your wives, look back at your wife and say, I'm sorry, and then take them out to lunch. You know, I'd rather hear the testimonies of God changing the lives of people than someone say, oh, wow, you have such good air conditioning units. I'd rather have children singing praise and growing in God than having people say, wow, what a nice room they meet in. rather have youth coming to worship the Lord than say, wow, that's a nice blade for your tractor for the snowplow. And I'd rather have outreach ministries touching people outside this church than have someone say, wow, those new tires on the van look pretty good. You see, people are more valuable than things. The moment we lose sight of that, we lose sight of the call of God. The moment we lose sight of that, we get off the journey that God has put us on. We get off the road and take a side road of self-value. But I want to stay on the road that God puts me on, and that is where people always have more value than things. Vision is not maintenance. Vision is people. Vision is always people. Now we do maintenance, absolutely. We want to think ahead for maintenance. We want to prepare ahead for maintenance. I want to be set for maintenance. But maintenance is not our focus. People are. You know, some things are hard to raise money for. You realize that? We have, let me just put this out there. Our church was built 40 years ago. Now, many of us weren't even around. Many of you weren't around 40 years ago. I was. I was in the front seat between mom and dad going to California. But when this building was built, they built it with a septic system. Since it's built, they've added plumbing all through this area of the city. Someday, that septic system's going to need to be replaced. And I'll tell you right now, that's not an easy thing to sell. I can't say, oh, let's get excited. We're going to do a septic system change. And everyone's going to say, amen. It's not going to happen, is it? Now, it's important. Let me tell you that much. Because if that thing goes out, we're doing camping in Canaan for a long time until we repair it. It's maintenance, yes, but it's not vision. God looks at people. And everything we do for maintenance has an ulterior motive, and that is ministry among people. I'm thankful for things. I'm excited about people. Thankful for things. Excited about people. Last week we had a time to visit after service with many of those who have started to come within the last 6 months. We do it twice a year, spring and fall. We invite those who are new to our fellowship to join us for just a time of fellowship and a simple meal, and we talk, we visit, we laugh, we get to know individuals. I really like visiting during the handshaking time. I try to make all the rounds, and it's hard though, you know? It's hard. If I want to talk to any one person, I just lost 4 other people I want to shake hands with. I like shaking hands with Brandon. He's always encouraging to me. He's one of those guys I like to talk to, because he's always uplifting to me. He's always a blessing to me. And you really are. I want you to know that. Oh, I don't want to embarrass you. This is Brandon. He doesn't want to be embarrassed by me right now. I like that conversation because it's special. But I can't do that to everybody on a Sunday morning, nor can you. So every 6 months we have this opportunity for new attenders to come and join us in the back. And last week we had that gathering, and some of you were able to come and be there. I mean, I really like it because I get to sit down and actually get a conversation with people to find out their journey, find out the road they've taken. And I value that. It's important to me. Many times during the week I find myself visiting with people over coffee. 3 to 7 times in an average week, I'm out to coffee with someone, just one-on-one, sitting across the table, and talk about life, ministry, and God. I love those times. To me, because that's relational. That's what God calls us to. During the weekdays, in the morning hours, I'm always in my office, and I kind of protect that time for my study and my prayer. And if you call, Elizabeth will generally try and point you to the afternoon unless it's a need. But in the afternoon, I really like to be with people rather than secluded in my office just by myself. I like to sit with individuals because that's where the value is for us. Even for our team members, our value must be those around us, not the things that we have. Things are of limited value. When I was young, My dad was an executive of a corporation or in a corporation and one of the executives. And so every year he got a brand new car from the company. Brand new car that had been assigned to him for 1 year. And he was always excited about his cars, and I was too young to really think about it too much. But one year he comes home, and we lived in the country, and we had a lot of different animals. My family is kind of strange in our animals. I mean, we had a crocodile. We had raccoons indoor. We had a fox indoor. We had a pheasant indoor. Not at the same time, thankfully. Different times in our journey. We had a funny road in our family. We had goats, chickens, and sheep, and things like that. And my dad comes home in his brand new assigned car. It's a four-door, I believe it's a Chevrolet. He comes home, and he jumps out of the car, leaves the door open, comes inside to bring all of us out to ooh and ah over his new car. When we finally walk outside into the yard to look at his brand new car, there's one of the goats in the driver's seat, chewing on his steering wheel. And I never forgot it. It showed the value of the car. I think that night we had goat for dinner. I don't remember the goat staying around much longer after that. I just don't remember it. What's most valuable to us? Is it the things we possess or the people we know? Is it the kids in our house or the house that the kids live in? What's the most valuable to us? And I think that same is true, that value system we develop is true all across the ministries we want of Walla Walla First. People are important. Things are things. If we ever struggle with that, if you ever struggle with that mentality, here's what you do. Buy some goats. On the road to the cross, Jesus was focused more on people and less on things. As I look at his journey to the cross, I see Jesus demonstrated that the daily needs of people were important. Matthew chapter 15, verse 29 through 32. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is 13 miles wide and 8 miles long, or 8 miles wide and 13 miles long, whichever way you want to say that. It's pretty big size sea or little lake there. Then he went up on a mountainside and sat down. Great crowds came to him, and they brought him lame, blind, crippled, mute, many others, and laid them at the feet of Jesus. He healed them. You know, it's interesting, during this time in history, there weren't hospitals or hospice or care centers for those who were sick, ill, or invalid, blind, lame. They didn't have any care for them. So it's the responsibility of mom and dad and relatives to take care of anyone that would be limited physically. And so that person would be sort of, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but in a way of reality, a difficulty for that family, a sort of burden for them to care for. So when these people came to Christ and they heard that Jesus healed them, they brought people from everywhere because they knew the potential of being healed was there. And so they were very important for them to bring him. And it's easy for them to bring him because they lived in their house with them. There's no place to put them other than with them in their home. And he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, and the lame walking, the blind seeing. Now we all would be amazed when watching that, especially if it's from your household. Someone who's never spoken a word, and all of a sudden their tongue is loosed and they begin to speak normal. Or someone all their life who can't see and is feeling around, and you've got to help them. And all of a sudden they can see and their eyes are open and colors are before them and they recognize you and they recognize you. What a miracle that would be. Not only were they excited about the miracles, they also had another excitement that they would have. We no longer have to care for this one. It now frees us up, and we can go back to our work, and they can be productive in our home, and they can also work. It is a two-way benefit for them, and they all knew that, and so they brought the people to Christ so that they would be healed. And they praised the God of Israel. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I don't want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. Jesus spent 3 days of his time teaching these people. He gave his time to them. He wasn't rushed. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't saying, you know, guys, I've done my 8-hour shift. I'm done today. I'll come back about a year from now, same time, same place. Come then. He stayed. He just continued to teach them and to bless them and to encourage them. He was in no rush. He was there to help. There to help. That's what Jesus did. He was there to help them because he was Lord of the people. He was there because of compassion on the people. He was there because he wanted to empower the people. That's who God is. Jesus was a Lord of compassion, a Lord of vision that wanted people to find what he desired for them. Coming in April, I'm doing a new series called The Artist. I'm excited about this series, and I've been working on it for a while now. The Artist. Because God has a definite image for us. He's made us in his image. What does that mean? God has a plan. He is the artist. Jesus was this man who had compassion on them. Compassion on them. That Greek word compassion simply means he was moved to do something. He was moved to do something. He didn't just hear the need, he did something about the need. The second thing we see is that very thing of compassion. He was moved to do something. Matthew 14:14, it simply says he had compassion on them. He was moved to do something. Matthew 20:34, he had compassion on them. He was moved to do something. Mark 8:2, I have compassion on these people. I'm moved to do something. Compassion does that. Compassion doesn't just let us hear something. It causes us to rise up and do something about it. That's what compassion does. On the road to the cross, Jesus went out of his way to give his compassionate touch to those who were in need. He went out of his way to touch people that needed Christ or needed his touch. This touch of compassion is something that we as believers, followers of Jesus, need to give as well. We need to be just as compassionate as Christ. Colossians 3:12, Paul writes this to the church at Colossae. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion. Clothe yourself with compassion. Clothe yourself with the desire and the desire, the ability to do something, that you will do something about it. With kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. I'm sure you've never heard of the Hawaiian island of Molokai. Molokai. It's a small island off one of the main or larger islands, and it's located in the state of Hawaii, but it has quite a history. Back in the 1800s, there's no cure for this contagious and deadly disease called leprosy. A disease that attacks the extremities of your body, your ears, your toes, your nose, your fingers. Horrible disease. Today it's curable. Back then it wasn't. In order to keep leprosy from spreading across the islands and create an epidemic, the government sent lepers to this island of Molokai, where people would be secluded from the rest of society. And they would live there, and they would die there. They wanted to protect the normal people from the lepers. 700 lepers were sent to that island or lived on that island. 700. In 1873, there was a young Catholic priest named Father Damien that knew they had to do something about the people, and he volunteered to spend his life on the island with the people and serve them. When he arrived, he saw people suffering greatly. He saw people in struggles. They were depressed. They had alcoholism problems, they had immoral problems, they had social problems, emotional problems, spiritual problems, as you can imagine. Very little rule, and just a lot of desperation. People desperately need an answer to why God? Why God? Why God? And here comes Father Damien. He chose to live among the 700 lepers, chose to live among them, knowing the dangers and realizing the inevitable result of his living among them would be devastation. While he was there, he built a hospital, had a clinic built. He also built 600 wood coffins because he knew that would be the plight of most of the people of the island. A man with great compassion, Father Damien. Each Sunday he held church services on the island. Many of the lepers would come to the church service, men and women both. When he stood up in front of his congregation every Sunday, here's how he began. Brothers and sisters. Even the term itself was accepting. Brothers and sisters. For years, he'd come and he'd stand and he'd say, brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters. Almost got redundant to where people knew what he's going to say before he said it. Brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters. At 42 years of age, Father Damien stood behind his pulpit one Sunday, as he had done hundreds of times. Except he didn't start with brothers and sisters that day. He said, my dear fellow lepers, I too am one of you. He had caught the leprosy himself and died as a leper. But in his compassion, Father Damien did something that nothing else would have done. He answered the question to the people, where is God? Because when Father Damien made the decision to move to that island, he showed them the compassion of God by being one of them. Just like Jesus Christ, when he came as God's only begotten Son to this leper-filled world of sin, and would say, brothers and sisters, I will become one of you. And on the cross, when he cried out, it is finished, he answered the question, where is God? Where is God? On the road to the cross, Jesus cared for the needs of the people. The final thing I see on the road to the cross, people discovered Jesus as the Messiah. During Palm Sunday, and we see some beautiful palm trees in our foyer today and one on the piano. During Palm Sunday, we find this reference in Mark chapter 11, verse 4 through 10. I want to read that. They went and found a colt outside in the street, tied at a doorway. This triumphal entry is really an entry of contrast. Interesting that it is. Here's the king of Israel riding in on a servant's donkey. King of kings coming in as a servant. Not a prancing steed, strong and mighty, but on a donkey's colt. Not in royal robes, but on clothes laid down on the colt for him to sit on. Not a king of force, but a king of love, mercy, and grace. Not asking others to sacrifice for him, but him offering to sacrifice for his people. Not an army, leader of armies of splendor and power, but a servant that helps others. Lowliness, servanthood. Didn't conquer nations, but rather conquered hearts. Didn't care about land, but cared about eternity. A message of peace with God, not of temporary peace. Jesus made his entry into the hearts of mankind. And that's where he reigns, in the hearts of people. Let's continue on. As he untied it, some people standing there asked, "What are you doing untying that coat?" Matthew says that the king coming on a foal of a donkey was an exact fulfillment of Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. If you read that passage of the Old Testament, it says this: "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on the colt, the foal of a donkey." Fulfilling of the Old Testament promise that your king is going to come riding on this donkey. Now, I don't know about you. Have you ever ridden on a donkey? They're not the funnest animals to ride. They're right next to a camel to me. It's just not an enjoyable animal to ride on. They're stubborn. They don't want to do what you want them to do. We used to own some of them. They are the meanest critters on the planet. They're work animals, beasts of burdens. Yet that's what Jesus chose to ride in. Continue on. "Why are you taking this donkey?" And they, the disciples, answered, as Jesus had told them. And the people let them go. When they brought the colt to Jesus, they put their coats over it. He sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut in the fields. It was a practice of the people of the East, or this time, to cover the ground for someone of honor, for a king or ruler. And they would find whatever they had available and they'd cover the ground with it to show respect. Many of the people would take their coats and lay it down to show respect, that here's what I own and it's below you. If they had nothing to lay down, they would cut down the palm leaves which were available to them, and they lay them down on the ground, and just as a sign of respect. And so that's what they would do. It was a sign of respect to Christ. In 2 Kings 9:13, Jehu had the same thing happen to him as he came into the town, as an example. Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, "Hosanna! God saves. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming King of our father David. Hosanna in the highest." There are two parts of this text that we see stand out. One is the Redeemer, Jesus, shows his humility. He came to serve rather than be served. It's a picture of conflict or of opposites, king, servant. The one sacrificing was also the conquering king. Philippians chapter 2, verse 5 through 8, Paul writes this to the church at Philippi. He's talking to you and I. And I think it really ties into Christ himself. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus Christ. Now, we're just talking about this mindset of Christ, how he's a servant of others. Who, being in the very nature of God, Christ, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in the appearance as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, even the death of the cross. He humbled himself. That word humbled in the Greek is kiosis. It means self-emptying of himself. In other words, Jesus laid aside his divine privilege, his prerogative, his rights. He simply, purposely laid them down. He chose to lay them down. And he took on himself the nature of a servant, the servant God, and became obedient to death, even the death of the cross. First thing we learned in that text was Jesus had the humility as a redeemer. And the second thing we see from that text of the palm leaves being laid down we discover he became an example to us in serving others. As a king, he became the servant, that we also should be the ones willing to serve. Colossians 3:16, my final verse. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion. That's something I choose to do. I choose to clothe myself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. On the road to the cross, there are many lessons can be learned. Here's our take home today for these lessons. The first lesson we learn: people are more valuable than things. People are more valuable than things. The second thing we learn: the daily need of people is important. And the third thing we learn: on the journey, we recognize Christ as our King, and that God is put here to serve him and to serve others. That's our take home. How do we apply that this week? I want to change my mindset to always look at people as more valuable than the things I own. I want to focus on the needs of those around me rather than my own needs. And I want to serve God fully, and I want to serve those around me. Those are the things we learn on this road to the cross of Christ. Next week, we'll look at the final stage of it. And it's going to be an interesting look at the cross and Mary's involvement in that process. But today we have a definite opportunity to walk with Christ as he walked. As he journeyed, we journey. And if we allow God to, he will use us as helpers, as guides to all those we come in contact with. This shows them Jesus Christ, the one who died and rose again for us. God bless you.